Terrorist attack in New York City. People were killed, innocent people were killed, civilians were killed. And I saw a lot of horrific things. Since 9/11, nothing has been the same. Everything has changed. Our world has changed.
Summer 2016, a view of the Manhattan skyline. On the site where the Twin Towers once stood, a new World Trade Center has been constructed. The structural void created by the 9/11 attacks has been filled. But what about the psychological trauma suffered by the people of New York? Starting in late 2001, photographer David Margolis spent 9 months documenting the work of first responders at Ground Zero. He worked out of this fire station, along with rescue workers, aid workers, and reporters. This memorial remembers the firefighters who died on that fateful day.
It brings it all back. It brings it all back, you know, the innocence of it, and then the terror of it, you know, coming back here and seeing what took place and knowing that the people around here really don't know what it was like to be there. You know, this is kind of a tourist site now.
And the tourists come from all over the world to pay their respects. Today, the site of the attack is pristine and approachable. Margolis finds it almost too sterile. But he also knows how it once looked. Margolis experienced firsthand the horrors of the 9/11 rescue effort. First responders sifting through the rubble, searching for survivors, usually in vain.
Well, the biggest change, obviously, is the Twin Towers are no longer here. We have a different type of building, a much more secure building. But the biggest change is the mindset. The mindset is we're completely, you know, we're almost bracing ourselves for the next attack. We're on edge. We're a nation on edge. We're in a world on edge.
Almost every American old enough to remember knows exactly where they were and what they were doing when they first heard about the 9/11 attacks. At Drew University in Madison, New Jersey, Scott Morgan has been researching the psychological effects of the attacks on individuals and on American society in general.
9/11 was a shock to the American psyche. Psychologists call it a threat to our moral order. The idea is that before we lived in a world to us that felt safe and secure, and after 9/11 some could say we were expelled from Disneyland. We no longer lived in a magical kingdom where we could believe we were invulnerable from attack. The safety, the danger of the world, the frightening world we live in could clearly be brought to our own shores.
But what is the source of this danger? Many New Yorkers and many Americans generalize and believe it comes from Islam, a religion that some assert encourages violence. Surveys indicate that about half of all Americans are of the opinion that Muslims have not gone far enough to renounce terrorism.
Americans came to associate the terrorists symbolically with Muslims and Arabs. And so what that means is that after 9/11, prejudice and discrimination towards Muslims and Arabs increased substantially. It spiked after 9/11 and has still yet to come down to pre-9/11 baselines.
About 1 million Muslims live in the New York metropolitan area. Abir Kawas is one of them. Both liberal and conservative American Muslims have felt marginalized in the wake of the 9/11 attacks.
I mean, quite frankly, I just feel really sick and tired of the rise in Islamophobia because it's something that I've experienced my whole life. So since I've been in 4th grade, that's when 9/11 happened, and it was understandable that that was the reaction that was going to happen. The community was going to be attacked, and I saw so many things. But it's been almost 15 years. It's been 15 years, and we're still seeing the community attacked. I still see people getting arrested in my community. I still see youth in fear. When things like this happen, like what happened today, people are scared to go out the next day. So you ask yourself, how long will this continue for?
Just a few weeks ago, on August 13th, a Muslim cleric and his assistant were shot and killed as they walked through the New York borough of Queens. Police arrested a 35-year-old man and charged him with 2 counts of second-degree murder. While the motive remains unclear, many local Muslims believe it was a hate crime. Thousands of people attended a prayer service for the victims. American society is deeply divided, and the issue of Muslim integration has become a polarizing theme in the current presidential election campaign. Abir Kawas lives with her mother and 2 sisters in the borough of Brooklyn. She has to Skype with her father. U.S. authorities sent him back to Jordan several years ago.
كيف حالك? I'm good. How are you? لا بحكي عادي. We'll come. Inshallah, we'll come in the summer. About 4 years after 9/11, because of changing immigration policies, my father was picked up by immigration customs enforcement, and he was arrested for 3.5 years. We tried to fight his case so that we can release him back, but after 3.5 years, he was deported back to Jordan. So ever since then, we've been living apart, and we just only get to visit him. He's not allowed to come back to the country, and we keep in touch by phone calls, Skype calls, etc. But for all this time, we've been living as a family separated because of 9/11. I miss you too. It's difficult to have a relationship over Skype because there's only so much you can say, and then there are times where we don't get to see each other on important days. Like today is my mom and dad's 30th anniversary, and so like all he can do is give her a Skype call, you know. And that's kind of sad, and I think he's sad about it and she's sad about it, you know.
Most Muslims in Brooklyn keep to themselves. They patronize Muslim businesses, restaurants, attorneys, and doctors. Abir Kawas is 24 years old. She majored in Latin American studies at college and has been working as a social worker for about 2 years. She works primarily with Arab American youth.
So I like this hijab because it's bright and it's also simple, so it's, you know, not too much going on. But I remember after 9/11, I used to try to dress more bright and wear brighter colors, especially when going to the airport, because I had this fear that I would be stopped or that I would scare somebody else and then they would maybe like complain about me on the airplane. And so whenever I go to the airport, I used to always wear bright colors, and I still wear them now, but I think just because they look good on me.
Kawas finds it difficult to talk about her life as a Muslim with her non-Muslim friends. They all live in the same city, but in 2 different worlds.
So when I was growing up, I used to always feel this big contradiction of being Muslim and American. And I also felt a little bit ashamed of my Muslim identity because people saw it so negatively. But as I grew up, I learned to embrace who I am. I learned to embrace my culture, be unapologetic about who I am, but also educate people about Islam and about myself just by being normal.
This is Calverton National Cemetery on Long Island, about 120 kilometers east of Ground Zero. William and Michelle McNaughton are visiting their son's grave. Both are retired New York police officers.
Our son was James McNaughton, and he was 27 years old, Jimmy. And he was a staff sergeant in the United States Army, and he was killed in action in Baghdad, Iraq on August 2nd, 2005 by a sniper.
He was also an NYPD officer. He was classed on 9/11. So this is why we're here today, because he wanted to be where the fight was. For me personally, coping with it, I worked here from 2006 to 2014. I worked part-time. I saw him in the morning when I got here. It was always first stop, and I saw him when I left.
You don't get used to it. You don't get used to it at all. Every day is another day. It's something that you have to learn to live with. It's what we call the new normal. I don't have a normal anymore. You have good days, you have bad days. Some days are better than others. When I'm really having a bad day, I ask to come here. It could be 3 o'clock in the morning, and I'm like, I need to go see him.
There are reminders of Jimmy throughout the McNaughton's house. They don't criticize the U.S. invasion of Iraq or the misleading Bush administration policies that led to it. They simply remember their son. To them, he's a hero.
In my opinion, the most important medal out of all of this paraphernalia you see here is this one. It's the Purple Heart. It's for guys who were wounded or killed in action. The Bronze Star's for bravery, Iraqi Campaign Medal, and a global war on terrorism. But to me, when you see this on somebody's uniform, you know they were in a fight.
Their son's room is filled with relics of the 9/11 attacks and the Iraq War. The war didn't change Bill and Michelle McNaughton's political views. They're conservative Republicans.
Jimmy's baby picture. He hated it.
They're likely to vote for Donald Trump.
What did my son die for? What did Obama do? Pulled the combat troops out. We went over there, we kicked ass, we did what we had to do. We did it with gloves on too, because you couldn't do this, you couldn't do that, you couldn't do this, but we got the job done. And we left millions of dollars in equipment. Never mind the blood lost and lives lost. For what? They're worse off now than they were before. So I don't understand that logic.
Is anything about war logical? War is driven by national interests. David Petraeus is a retired U.S. Army general who led U.S. forces in Iraq from 2007 to 2008. Although he would be in a position to explain the U.S. military intervention following the 9/11 attacks, he won't be drawn into the debate over political decisions.
The sheer cost, the loss of life, the expenditure of money, the sheer effort, the focus this has taken for our country, and the frustration about the results. As I've noted before, these are not wars where you take the hill, plant the flag, and go home to a victory parade. These are wars that grind on. These are generational struggles. And I think as that awareness has grown, there has been, again, an understandable desire to try to develop a strategy and approach that is sustainable.
But the war in Iraq destabilized the entire region. And Petraeus does imply that the U.S. is not fully prepared to deal with a new wave of international terrorism.
There had been a sense, though, that we were safeguarded by the oceans to the east and to the west, and by our allies to the north and friends to the south. Quite an enviable position. And again, certainly a position that, since the end of the Cold War at least, we'd not felt that kind of threat, direct threat. And so it really, the world turned over that day.
Most Americans are patriotic, and many have become even more so since the 9/11 attacks. A special kind of culture of remembrance has developed, one that some non-Americans cannot fully comprehend. Among the true heroes of 9/11 are firefighters and police officers. Thousands of them still suffer from the effects of their work at Ground Zero. Dennis Frederick, a former New York port policeman, suffers from post-traumatic stress disorder. He visits Ground Zero only rarely, always accompanied by his therapy dog Bailey and his wife Nancy. Frederick was one of many first responders who rescued survivors from the ruins of the Twin Towers.
We went up to the 14th floor when Building 2 got struck, and we realized it was a terrorist attack. While I was in that stairway, it was crowded, it was full of pity and shame and sorrow and all kinds of emotions. First I heard it, then I saw it, and I didn't know at first it was bodies coming down, but second time I did. And then I looked up and I saw the building coming down, and I jumped underneath the fire truck. There I apparently lost consciousness.
Dennis, I'm gonna get you meds, okay, hon?
Okay, thanks.
Soon afterward, Frederick was forced to retire early from the port police after 22 years of service. He simply couldn't handle the job anymore.
Dennis takes about 22 pills a day. I fill up a pill box for him. Without those pills, he can't make it through the day. He'll start slurring his words. He has to have them.
He's tried to blot out the memories of the horrors that he saw at Ground Zero. He's built a sort of sanctuary for himself in the garage. He feels comfortable there.
It was a slow transition to the garage. I was in all the rooms, but I couldn't get comfortable until I made this my comfort zone. I don't come out of the garage yet. I'm still in here. I'm still in this self-imposed isolation, this self-imposed lockup, jail, yeah. This is jail. I don't think, I guess you can't get away from it. It's a jail. But it's a nice jail. It's a jail without bars. It's a jail that I can walk out of and feel free. I have a television here that I watch old westerns because they're innocuous. They don't have anything to do with reality.
Bailey has been with Frederick for a year now.
Come on, girl.
She's a trauma therapy dog, trained to provide comfort and affection.
Bailey, my dog, service dog, creates a zone of protection for me. A zone where people don't enter too close. A zone where I can feel comfortable. She's my hands pushing away the world, keeping it away from me. You gotta go back out and in.
Time does not heal all wounds. Bill and Michelle McNaughton are still grieving over the loss of their son. But they're proud of the fact that he served his country. One of the streets in the neighborhood has been renamed in his honor, as well as a building on the U.S. base in Guantanamo.
I just want the world to get along. Whatever religion I am, whatever religion you are, that's how I feel. I just don't understand. We all want the same mission. We all want peace. We all believe in God. So I know my God doesn't say to kill, and I'm quite sure your God doesn't say to kill. So why? Why do we have to kill one another? It doesn't matter your religion, your nationality, your color. We all want the same thing. We want our families to be happy, and we want peace. At least that's what I want.
But a lot of Americans are concerned about what they perceive as the threat posed by some Muslims. Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump deliberately plays upon those concerns in some of his speeches.
All right, hey guys. So today we're gonna go over the Take on Hate presentation. They don't seem to.
Since 2014, Abir Kawas has been working for the Arab American Association of New York. She gives lectures on the dangers of bias against Muslims and coaches others to do the same.
He pretty much said it was a conflict that has been happening.
I want people to understand that a horrible act of violence affects everybody. It affects the community that is affiliated with that act of violence especially, and that there are negative ramifications because of that. I want us to all see that we're all experiencing the same thing, and that 9/11 created the same trauma, types of trauma to all of us. You want to talk about people being physically injured?
And people will live with that trauma for some time to come.
You can mention surveilling.
Psychologists say that Americans want to feel safe and secure again. So many of them will accept increased government surveillance and more spending on national defense. But will this provide real security?
So America's responses in the future are going to be somewhat hard to predict. It's probably the case that there's never going to be an attack that was as shocking as 9/11. On the other hand, with each additional attack, there's sort of echoes of September 11th. So our responses in the future very much depend on the severity of those attacks, the frequency of those attacks, and in many ways how surprising or unexpected those attacks may be.
Dennis Frederick no longer fears terrorist attacks. The only attacks he now faces are on the chessboard. He often relaxes by playing chess with himself. It helps him to cope with the effects of his stress disorder.
Come on, Billy. Go lay down. Billy, go lay down.
9/11. Countless books and movies have tried to capture the events that took place on that day in 2001. Dennis Frederick has also written a book. It helps him cope with life since the attacks.
At the end of self, where does one go? To the rear or to the fear? If only the clock would stop where your fragile mind can find your secreted memories. Turn them to light, turn them to flight. All old becomes new, always to the end, always to the end.